Okay, guys, we'll go ahead and get going. I am recording, so those that can't be here um, can catch up on what's happening today. So, a couple things. So today is definitely a Medusahead day. I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of Medusahead invasion, some specifics about Medusahead, and some really brief introductions to a couple of solutions. And then I'm going to turn you guys loose into groups and send you out to kind of gather a lot of information about Medusahead relative to solutions. So I contacted a colleague who has dealt with a lot of Medusahead, both invasion and research in a couple of different ecosystems. And he actually sent me a PowerPoint to kind of present to you guys today. And the good news is this PowerPoint you can find online. So I'll put that in the Medusahead or in the grazing management plan folder as well. So when we get done. And so my goal is to kind of walk us through that today and then answer any questions you guys have about kind of Medusahead basics, then push you out into breakout rooms, into groups and task you with starting to find some solutions. And so we'll work in groups today for a while and then come back together at the end of group work and share some ideas and some thoughts about the information that we found. So, all right, really quickly, just please keep in mind that on Friday, you guys have that case or set of case studies due for stocking rate. So don't forget about those. Happy to answer any questions that you may have about those today as well. So, all right, let me go ahead and go. Share my screen. Okay. All right, so cooperative extension personnel, both at the state level and at the local county level, have been working on Medusahead since the 1950s. So this is not a new problem. I'm not sure we've made a ton of progress with Medusahead invasion, but there's been a lot of research done about how to mitigate some of its effects. And so today, I'm just going to take you through some basics that was prepared as part of this talk by two county extension agents. So Teresa Bicchetti and Josh Davey. Teresa is down in Stanislaus County, kind of Central Valley area. Josh Davey is the cooperative extension agent in Tehama, Glenn, and Colusa counties. So he's in our neck of the woods. And then Dr. Elise Gornish, she was with the UC Rangelands group at UC Davis as a state specialist. She's since moved on to University of Arizona, but is still working a lot with Medusahead in the northern part of that state. And so they put this presentation together a few years ago, and they because they were really trying to focus on getting some good solutions in place for Medusahead. So the first step in that is to educate land managers about Medusahead basics. And so some of the stuff we talked really briefly about on Monday. And so we, as far as background goes, Medusahead is a member of the Triticale family. So this is a similar family that is also gives or is part of, sorry, foxtail barley is a part of this family as well. And so the picture that we're looking at here is a picture of Medusahead. And if you guys have ever been around foxtail or foxtail barley, we also call it. That's its kind of official common name. It looks very similar. And the big reason that we can tell the difference between Medusahead and foxtail barley is the length of the awns. So the awns are these little itty bitty finger-like things that are coming out of the inflorescence on the seed heads. And so Medusahead awns are really long, and sometimes they get a little bit curly at the end. And so we'll look at a couple of different pictures and different stages of production here in just a few minutes. All right, so this Medusahead is definitely a member of the wheat, barley, and cereal rye family. And it also is a member of the wheatgrass, as well as the wild rye and the goatgrass family. Sorry, my email is gonna go crazy. And so it is technically classified as a cool season annual grass, which I think you guys have a pretty good handle on at this point in time. It originated out of the Middle East, so out of that Mediterranean region. And it looks like, from a historical standpoint, that a really long time ago, so like 23,000 years ago, Medusahead could have been used as for human food consumption. So keep in mind, it's part of the foxtail barley family and a part of the wheatgrass family. So there is nutritive value associated with the seed heads and stuff. But from an animal consumption standpoint, especially now, it doesn't have a lot of palatability. So just because there is nutrients associated with it doesn't necessarily make it palatable. All right, and so with this photo here, we can actually see some different examples of related grasses. So over on the left-hand side, we've got barbed goat grass, and this is super invasive as well. Barbed goat grass is actually absolutely horrible because it drops seed 2 times a season. And so we're doing a lot of barbed goat grass research right now too, because it is really invasive and actually has the, oh my gosh, sorry, I've got to shut my email off or it's gonna, sorry, quit. It's gonna drive me nuts. All right, here we go. So again, barbed goat grass is really super invasive. There's a lot of research going on right now to try to prevent it. We see it showing up a lot in annual grasslands here in the Central Valley, like around the Chico area. There's a little bit of it at the MacArthur Swamp, but not to the extent that we see it kind of on the west side of the northern Sacramento Valley. All right, the next one is jointed goat grass, related to barbed goat grass. Looks a little bit different because it's got multiple joints here. Still a similar or a member of this family and still drops seed twice a year. The foxtail or hair barley, what we commonly call as foxtail barley, here in the center, this is what we would be probably more familiar with. So we see a lot of annual foxtail barley pop up on annual rangelands here in the West Coast. And we also see some kind of in the Intermountain region where the MacArthur Swamp is located at. But you can see here the awns, I can't see very well, are pretty short. And so compared to, let me see if I can just annotate this a little bit. So the awns here are pretty short compared to the awns on the Medusahead side. And so they are very similar looking. When the plant is actually in an active growing stage, both of them are going to be green, but the inflorescence, come on, where'd you go? The inflorescence is actually going to be almost a lighter, more fluorescent green in the Medusahead compared to the barley. And so those are just some things that you can watch for. Okay, and then On the next to last grass here is ripgut brome. So it is related and part of the triticale family. It has really long awns as well, but they're tightly coupled within seed pod. And so you can get 5, 6, 7 awns per seed pod there. And ripgut brome is a good feed. Cattle will eat it, sheep will eat it. They don't like it as much when it's headed out, but prior to heading out, it's a really good palatable feed that has an adequate nutrition value. And so one way that we can tell the difference between ripgut brome compared to foxtail barley and Medusahead is if you pick a tiller of ripgut brome when it's headed out and you run your hands from the top of the plant, or you run your fingers from the top of the plant to the bottom of the plant, it is very, very prickly and it almost will rip your skin. So there's a lot of starch associated with it and a lot of coarseness associated with those awns as well. And then soft chest is another annual grass. It is of moderate palatability for animals and doesn't have very long awns. So the awns here, I can't tell where my thing is, but the awns here are just barely at the ends of those seed pods. So all of these guys have similar characteristics in the fact that they have seed pods and awns at the top of the grass tiller. But the way that they're oriented is a little bit different, and the way they look is a little bit different, which is where we get subspecies differences. Okay, come on. What is going on? Okay, I have no mouse. Fantastic. Not quite sure what's going on here. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Annotation does not work very well on my laptop. Sorry, guys. Okay. We kind of briefly went over this on Monday. So we know that Medusahead came from the Mediterranean region. We have no idea how it got here other than it was brought over with the settlement of the West. And so the first area that it was noticed in was actually, or recorded in, was actually Roseburg, Oregon, which is where this red star is up here. And so just because it was first noticed there doesn't necessarily mean that's where it started spreading. So it's really not known how Medusahead was introduced to the US, but it's been suggested that it arrived as a contaminant in a cereal grain seed. And so it could have been clinging also to the fur of livestock animals that were imported to the West Coast. So because Medusahead seeds are really small, like a lot of cereal grains, the plant goes to seed a lot earlier than most domesticated cereals. So for example, wheat and barley here in the US tends to go to seed probably like 4 to 6 weeks later than when Medusahead usually does, if it's grown here in the Central Valley, which there isn't a lot grown in the Central Valley because there's other crops that are of higher value. But when you get up into areas like the MacArthur area where the swamp is at, the Medusahead will actually go to seed the first couple of weeks of May. And we don't harvest wheat up there until sometimes July, the first part of August, just depending on when it gets planted. So even though they're related, they have very different characteristics as far as when they go to seed and when the seed sets. All right, so Medusahead is crazily spreading throughout California. So you can see the difference here between where it was recorded in 1995 compared to 2005. So we've had Medusa in our neck of the woods, the northern part of the state, for a long time, since the 1950s and before that. But we're slowly starting to see Medusahead creep south into the coastal foothills. And as far as its dynamics, the Medusahead presence is actually highly related to the amount of precipitation that different parts of the state get. And so specifically, we have seen Medusahead occur on rangelands that get anywhere from 10 to 40 inches of precipitation a year. However, it's more typical and in a higher population in areas that get 12 to 24 inches. So which is why we see a lot of it around the Chico area on these rangelands, is because we get about 21 inches of rainfall per year on average. And so the areas here that are in orange and light yellow, so those areas around the edge of the Central Valley, the northern Sacramento Valley, and then up in the northeastern part of the state over here where the swamp is at. So just a point of reference, the MacArthur Swamp is going to be right here on the edge of Shasta and Lassen counties and just south of Modoc and Siskiyou counties. So it's kind of right up in that Four Corners region. And so these areas are really going to be prone to Medusahead. And so you can see as we go south, we get a lot of that yellow and orange precipitation levels along the coasts as well. So, one thing I will say here that Josh made a note of is that we see less Medusahead in areas where there is more density of oak trees. And so oak trees can be oak scrub, so brush, or it could actually be actual trees like we see around the Bidwell Park area. And so if there is an area that has oak habitat, we tend to see less prominence of Medusahead. And so Medusahead loves this type of soil. So if you guys have ever been around Upper Park or anywhere throughout California, you will actually see during the summer and the fall, when the soil is pretty dry, this cracking effect. And so this is a indication of coarse, poorly developed soil. So this is going to be areas that can be kind of a loamy soil, so a higher quality soil. But in most arid areas, especially semi-arid areas like the northeastern part of the state, Medusahead really likes clay soils. And so just if you guys are out and walking around and you see big cracks like this in the soil, that's a good indication that you are in an area with a lot of clay. And here in Butte County, we have a lot of this type of ground. It makes really great like ground for growing rice because that clay will hold the water for a long time. But it also is the type of soil that really likes to have Medusahead in it as well. All right, so Medusahead causes a lot of problems. So first and foremost, it's not very palatable for animals. It is palatable early in the growing season before it starts concentrating silica, and then it's palatable after the plant has died as residual dry matter. So, which is this yellow stage that you're looking at here. The problem with Medusahead is that if it isn't removed through grazing, mowing, tilling, whatever means necessary, it will actually cause what we refer to as a thatch layer. And so this is the same thing as a fine fuel layer that really can cause fires to take off very, very quickly. And so the silica rich thatch is going to develop of Medusahead is going to develop in really heavily Medusahead infested areas that are dry. So these dry sites is where we're going to see a lot of this thatch layer build up. And what ends up happening is it creates a whole crop or a whole year's worth of a thatch layer. And the only benefit of it is that it actually helps to protect the soil layer by insulating it a little bit. The negative aspects of this are that it causes a fine fuel load for fire proliferation. It actually will is so convoluted, and it will as it lays over, it prevents even good seeds from getting down to the soil layer, so that it can't those seeds can't germinate to outcompete the next crop of Medusahead. But the seed heads of Medusahead actually have the ability to germinate in the thatch layer. And so it will actually germinate in the thatch layer, and then it will grow roots down to the soil and establish there. It is a crazy, crazy plant that has come up with some really good ways to proliferate itself. So the seeds are going to be, again, have very long awns. So if we're looking at this seed pod here, okay, down here towards the bottom, this is what we call the pod. So this has the DNA that is associated with the seed, with the seedling. And then the awn is very sticky. So it has little finger-like projections off of the awn layer, which enable that seed to kind of stick to hair on wildlife species, dogs, grazing animals, etc. And so this is how seeds can disperse from one spot to another. And so wildlife probably have been a big factor in spreading Medusahead, just because the seed pods are going to get buried in their hide or on their coat. So they like to stick not only to animals, but they will stick to equipment and humans, and really to areas they can easily take hold in areas where they aren't dominant and soon become dominant. So Medusahead is another negative aspect to Medusahead growth, is that because Medusahead is a grass, so an annual grass, the Medusahead seeds aren't really super palatable to a lot of our native wildlife species. So this bird here on this slide, this is a sage grouse. And so this was taken in the sagebrush steppe ecosystem. So probably Eastern Oregon is my guess. And you can see that around it, it's got a whole bunch of residual dry matter, and it's all grasses that is around it that have, and we know that they're annual because they're dead, right? And they're really thin and fine. And so these most likely are cheatgrass tillers or cheatgrass plants here, but you can see a little bit of Medusahead back here. And so Medusahead seeds really aren't palatable to birds at all. And so the bird species that eat, or sorry, not the bird species, the native seed-eating rodents that we find on rangeland really don't like Medusahead because it is so high in silica. And so we can't get anything to eat this crap, right? So we can't get livestock species to eat it. We can't get wildlife to eat it. We can't even get rodents to eat it. And so if there's a high presence of Medusahead in a pasture on a piece of rangeland, typically you won't find too many rodents in that area because they can't utilize that as a feed source. And so we see lots and lots of consequences of Medusahead infestation throughout these type of communities as well. And so just a quick note about sage grouse. So sage grouse is a threatened species at the EPA level. So the Endangered Species Act has different levels of gosh, all my words are escaping me. Basically, there is species that are threatened and species that are endangered. And if you make it onto that endangered list, that species comes or is subject to a whole lot of protection. And unfortunately, a whole lot of that protection is counterintuitive to land management. So we have to be careful with the Endangered Species Act because it can actually push an area where those species are located from a multiple use land management system into a single use management system. And that's a big complaint that I personally have with a lot of the federal systems, is that we argue that it's going to be for multiple use, but then we protect these birds like they're the only thing that birds or other species, wolves are a big part of this, or horses, as they are the priority for there. And so a lot of decisions get made to benefit them. And unfortunately, the rest of the system kind of decreases in quality. And so sage grouse is a threatened species. We've done a really good job as land managers, both ranchers, federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, etc., to work to keep sage grouse off the endangered species list. So there's lots of good collaborations, especially in Oregon, that are using management techniques to actually increase sage grouse numbers. And these are the most finicky little birds ever. They're also stupid. So they will fly into fences. So out on rangeland, like on BLM allotments in Eastern Oregon and Nevada and Idaho, they actually have to put reflectors on fences out there so that the birds won't fly into the fences. So they don't fly very well. And they really, really like sagebrush. So they eat sagebrush leaves, they use sagebrush for protection. They nest and roost in sagebrush, and then the sage grouse chicks actually eat the protein or the flowers on sagebrush in the spring. So they're really, really high in protein, and they really help the hatchlings survive during that 6 weeks that they're with mom. But overall, they're a dumb bird. And if you guys have ever seen sage grouse, I'll actually try to pull it up, but sage grouse leks, so during the mating season, they're really kind of fun to watch. The males are super crazy and they make this really weird sound, and to try to attract the females and stuff. And so there's a lot of management considerations that are being made right now in the sagebrush steppe area that have sage grouse as the priority right now. And so, but the take-home message related to Medusahead is that Medusahead habitat or where Medusahead is not conducive to sage grouse, because typically the Medusahead is going to actually chase out sage grouse or sagebrush, as well as some of the other plants that the sage grouse eats. You want to see better comment. So they were flying up and you were hitting them. Oh my gosh. Yeah, sage grouse.
It was horrible. I honestly, the first time I was like, what was that? And then I was like, you know what? I remember Dr. Diatley talking about sage grouse and saying they're not the brightest, but I was like, they're just committing suicide willingly.
I know. So there's that whole like evolutionary argument too of like, should we be protecting the dumbest species out there? And I guess everybody has a place, so that's okay. We'll keep protecting them. All right. So the thatch layer of Medusahead not only prevents other species from germinating, but it enhances the ability of itself to germinate. And so some things that we also notice with these thatch layers, so when we get a crop of Medusahead that dies and then lays over with weather, like it gets pounded by rain or snow or whatever, and it lays over on top of the soil, it does not allow the soil temperature to increase in the spring, which is what is needed for some of these other more desirable species like soft chest and ripgut brome and foxtail barley to take place. And so it can actually insulate the soil layer, which is great for Medusahead, but it's not really, it's not great for other more desirable species. And so that thatch layer will also prevent seed contact within the mineral of the soil. Thatch will slow soil warming, like we just talked about, prevents other seedlings taking hold and germinating. And we also think that there's other allelopathic effects that Medusahead has on other species. And so allopathy is a $10 word for basically having some sort of a negative effect on germination of another species or itself. So like, for example, if you guys are familiar with walnuts at all, walnuts are allelopathic because of the chemical in the hull of the walnut. And so it actually will prevent other species from growing in the soil. So that's why we see like walnut orchards, mature walnut orchards, not have anything planted in between the rows of trees, is because it kills it. It doesn't allow it to grow. And I forget what that compound is. I'll think of it later. We used to study it in 490 a long time ago. All right, so it was interesting. So one of these studies that is listed down here at the bottom determined that Medusahead seeding establishment was 47 times greater under litter than it was on bare ground. So Medusahead likes thatch, it likes litter, and it creates it for itself. It is a potent little plant, I'm telling you guys. All right, so fire can also have an impact on invasion of Medusahead. Yeah, Cheyenne, go ahead.
What a good like research question, like to put into one search or something, would be like, how can cattle grazing like reduce thatch layer? Would that be something good to search for?
Yeah, absolutely. So there should be some work out there on, and it's probably not just you'll probably see some sheep work as well on removal of the thatch layer. And that's actually a really big argument for why we need grazing or more grazing on rangeland, is to help remove that fine fuel load or that thatch layer. So when you guys hear thatch, you can think fine fuel load as well. Cool. Yeah, so Medusahead that dies and then lays over and creates that thatch layer really creates a fine fuel layer, and it really allows fire to start, and then it will carry fire. And so this is some of the issues that from the Carr fire, so up outside of Reading in 2017, 2018. I can't remember, gosh. So anyway, this poor older couple was pulling a RV trailer on 299 West headed to the coast, and they blew a tire and it sparked. And on the side of the road, there was a whole bunch of like Medusahead and fine fuel load, and it caught really quickly and it just took off. And so that, in combination with some crazy west winds and some really hot temperatures, like I think that week was like 115 or 117 in Reading, it just came over the top of the hill from the west towards the east into Reading. And so you can see driving through that area now, if there wasn't Medusahead there before, which there's definitely Medusahead there now. All right, so from a competitive standpoint, Medusahead competes for basic nutrients. So it competes for water, minerals, with against all other annual grasses, but also perennial grasses as well. And so keep in mind that annual grasses tend to have shorter, shallower roots. They use the top 4 inches of topsoil. Perennial grasses tend to send a root system deeper. So anywhere from 2 feet, sometimes down to 9 feet if we're in the Midwest. And so Medusahead can actually chase out other desirable annual grass species, and it can kill off perennial grass species as well. And so we have to be really, really careful when we're trying to establish perennial grasses, because we have to manage that very well, or the Medusahead will just choke it out and kill it. And so there was some work done in Lassen County on Medusahead infested sites, where they compared infested versus uninfested sites. And researchers ended up finding that there was a reduction in nitrogen mineralization, reduced total nitrogen, and an increased pH on areas that had infested Medusahead soils. And so, but they did not detect any issues in the soil microbiotics. And so the microbia in the soil didn't change, but the nutrients associated with the soil changed and the pH changed. And so all of those shifts actually end up favoring Medusahead and disfavoring some of the other annual and perennial grass species. Right, and then of course, more Medusahead equals less grazing. So Medusahead by itself is less palatable, actually has really poor palatability, because it concentrates silica from the soil. In addition, Medusahead, the morphology of it is very rough and sticky. So the awns are very sticky and coarse. And so when they seed out, animals do not want to eat it, because it actually, especially in cattle, I see it more in cattle than I do sheep, but I also ranch cattle. I don't have sheep. So it could be biased, but if you guys have ever felt the inside of a cow's mouth, it's very rough, right? They have a lot of papillae in there, where a lot of those microbes and stuff live, because that's the first introduction of bacteria to the feed source to start breaking it down. And you can get Medusahead and some other grasses like stuck up in between those papillae, and it can cause really bad sores, and they won't want to eat, so their mouths get sore really quickly. And so some research has actually documented a reduction in grazing capacity from upwards of 75% to 80% in heavily infected rangelands. So what that means is that you'll see a lack of, or 75 to 80% reduction in domestic animal grazing in areas that has high levels of Medusahead. All right, so the key to controlling Medusahead is understanding Medusahead growth. And so this is why we are spending a lot of time on these ecological components. Okay, so you guys are going to spend some time today going really deep to make sure that you have a good understanding of Medusahead growth, because that needs to be demonstrated in your grazing management plan. So think of this as Julie has very little background in Medusahead and doesn't really understand how it grows, even though she does, okay? But you guys are going to treat it like she doesn't. So I need you to teach her in your grazing management plan about Medusahead. Okay, so feel free to step into that teaching zone. All right, so knowing the way that Medusahead grows, again, is a really critical key component to how we can start to manage for it. And so we need to know the critical times when Medusahead is susceptible to treatment. Okay, and those treatments can look very different. It could be fire, it could be seeding, it could be chemical, it could be mowing, etc. Okay, and the key here is that grazing can be a good management tool, but only at a very, very specific window of time. So I encourage you guys to make grazing one of your solutions, okay? So, or use grazing as a combination of solutions. And so we want to make sure that grazing before or after that window will reduce Medusahead and not increase Medusahead. So just be cognizant of that. Okay, so here are some series of pictures about the different stages of growth with Medusahead. All right, so the first photo over here is labeled as V2. And so this is an early vegetative stage. So this means that the tillers here are going to be pretty short. They're a really kind of light, almost fluorescent green. If you guys are in the Central Valley right now and you look out over across rangeland, the stuff that's coming up right now that is very thin and very light green, almost like it has a nitrogen deficiency, that is probably Medusahead. I hate to say it, but it probably is. And so it actually establishes these stalks and these root systems that go pretty deep into the first probably inch and a half of soil. And then it sends out this fibrous root mass to gather nutrients and water. And so this is what the early vegetative or Medusahead looks like in the early vegetative stage. In the next vegetative stage over here to the right-hand side, labeled as V3, this is what we would call late vegetative stage. And what ends up happening is we actually see these internode areas start to grow. So here in the middle is our main tiller, okay? And these main tillers are going to end up sending shoots out that are what we call nodes. And so these nodes start growing and growing and growing, and they actually are almost in the shape of the boot. And so this is a really key piece of relative to management. So animals will graze Medusahead before the boot stage, but not after the boot stage. So we are aiming to graze animals between V2 and V3. And this happens very, very quickly, especially if we get super favorable conditions, like we have adequate precipitation and we have the correct soil conditions. So that really drives down the amount of time that we can manage Medusahead in a specific window. All right. Let me make sure I'm telling you guys everything correctly. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So the R stages have to do with reproduction. Okay, so we have our beginning of the R4 stage and as well as the R5 stage on this graph or on this figure here. So over on the left-hand side, we have the beginning part of the R4 stage. And this is where we see the emergence of the awns. Okay, so the awns, if we look at R5 over here, are going to be these long, narrow finger-like projections coming off of the seed pods here. And we can just start to see them emerge in the beginning of the reproductive stage. And so when we see the emergence of the awns to the full emergence of the seed head, we are in the beginning of the reproductive stage there. All right, and then, so this is another example of what R4 looks like. So you can see we have the seed pods here, and if I annotate this, it's probably not gonna work. So stick with me for just a second, guys. white. Okay, go ahead, Cheyenne.
I don't have a question. Oh,
Oh.
I never put my hand down. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It just popped up and said you had your hand up. So, okay, so that area where I marked the white, that is actually the seed head. Okay, and then I gotta find my mouse. Why do you keep disappearing? Come on, everybody. Oh. Okay, so then the area just above that seed head here, that is going to be the awns. So we're going to have awns coming off of the seed head. And so these have a lot of like evolutionary function, right? So they help drive the seed during windstorms. They help the seed not to get lost. It can get stuck in the thatch layer and germinate there, those type of things. And so we also in the as we move, from the R4 stage into the R5 stage over here, on the right hand side, we can see that we now have a fully emerged seed head. Okay, so we can see the seed heads here, and then the awns that are coming off of that. And those seed heads are actually getting bigger and they're pushing out. So the whole part of the inflorescence here is getting bigger and wider because we're starting to see a lot of growth of that seed head. And so what ends up happening is the florets actually start to open up at that point in time, giving it its kind of flower width. And at that point in time, we can also see visible anthers. And so it's really hard to see the anthers here, but that's actually those white areas through kind of over on the left-hand side here. So let me annotate that. And so for those of you guys that have been through genetics or plant science 101, why are anthers important? So anthers, stigmas, not making any sense.
They contain pollen.
They do contain pollen, exactly. And so that is the biggest piece of the reproductive cycle there. So thank you for that. Okay. All right. So let me clear everything. Get out of here and we'll keep rolling. Okay. So after those reproductive or the R5 and R6 stages, the other parts of the reproductive stages we can get into here is actually looking at the kernels. And so the seed kernel, so don't think corn kernel, okay? So we also have kernels associated with these grass species. And the R7 stage is where we see the kernels starting to elongate. Okay, so we have short kernels over here and we got this big guy over here. So it's starting to elongate inside the floret until it reaches its full length. In the eighth reproductive stage here, we call this the seed milk stage. And so the kernels actually occupy the full length of the inside part of the floret or the palea. And palea, I think that's how you say it. And then stage 9 is where we see the seed be very soft and squishy. So we call this the dough stage. And then by the time we get to stage 10 over here, it goes from the reproductive stage to the mature stage. And this happens very quickly. So in M10, All the seeds in the seed head are in the mature stage and are hard. So what would be the significance of the difference between the R9 stage and the mature 10 stage? There, what do you, I mean, the seed heads are either doughy or they're hard. So let's think on that for a minute. Why would that be significant from a management standpoint?
Palatability
Maybe palatability, yeah.
or durability also.
Okay, take that a little further.
They're more easily like spread and they live instead of, so if they're still doughy and they're spread, then they can die because they're still like vulnerable.
Yep.
Um,
That's exactly it. So if we still have a seed pod that is doughy and soft, then we still have the ability to kind of manage it, right? And it's not fully mature at that point in time either. So the reproductive capability of it is still low at that standpoint. So the fertility is going to be pretty low at the R9 stage. But once that seed pod hardens, that means that it's fully functional, it's fertile, and it has and it's going to be really hard to treat. And in addition to that, it's not going to be very palatable at all because it's super coarse at this point in time. And so the next stages, I think there aren't any here. So sorry, let me go back. The next stages after the mature stage are death, right? So that plant has done what it needed to do. It created a really hard, mature seed head. The seeds are going to drop. And at this point in time, the tiller is going to be technically dead. It's going to dry up. So all the water content is going to go out of the stem and out of the awns. And the color is going to be that pretty sandy yellow color, but it's not going to be gray at this point. And at this point in time, because there isn't a whole lot of not palatability, but a lot of strength to the stem or the tiller at this point in time, the seeds are going to shatter. And that shattering effect is where we see them fall to the ground, get stuck in its own thatch layer, and be able to stay dormant until the next growing season. And so the last stage is what they call the L12 stage, and that's where the plant turns gray. So if you guys have an area that or a piece of rangeland that wasn't super grazed heavily right now, it may look gray. There might be green coming underneath it, but if you look out just across the top of it, it might look gray. That's that L12 stage. And so that is the plant that is remaining from the previous season. And we call that in California RDM, or residual dry matter. So Medusahead won't be the only species that make up residual dry matter. There will also be other annual grass species, but that is something that is unique to our Mediterranean climate compared to other ecosystems like the sagebrush steppe or the grasslands that have a heavy presence of perennial grasses. Okay, so as far as phenology, we see most of the seeds go through really rapid germination in the fall. So like right now, all this green grass that is coming up is coming up because we had we had at least a ½ inch of moisture, and the soil temperature dropped below 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that is the perfect combination for germination. And so we probably saw those seeds, if they weren't actually associated with the soil layer, they were held together by the thatch layer of Medusahead. They germinated and grew a root system down to the soil to actually get the nutrients and stuff. And so we can see that rapid germination and growth in the fall. So even though A lot of Northern California is starting to green up, and that makes me feel good. The animal or the cattle and the sheep are out grazing, but that plant is very young and is probably 70 to 80% water. So there isn't a ton of nutrients in it, but they are able to eat it. Okay, so that is the reason that we like to leave enough residual dry matter in the spring when we ship animals to higher elevations, and then come back to some residual dry matter in the fall, because the green grass that's coming up, you can't just turn animals out and expect them to survive without supplementing some other type of protein and energy. All right, and then so the Medusahead plant is going to germinate really early in the fall, and then some of its evolutionary benefits are that in the spring it's going to stay green later. So if you get into mid to the end of April and the first part of May, and there's still a green tint to rangeland here in the Central Valley, chances are it's all Medusahead. So it stays green for about 2 weeks longer than the other more desirable palatable grasses. All right, so let's really quickly talk about control stuff. And this is just a basis for you guys to get started, okay, as far as like different solutions that you want to focus on. There's been lots of work done with burning, intentionally burning, not wildfire burning, okay? So fire has been a potential solution. There's been quite a bit of work done with herbicide. There is some work done with seeding that is actually a competition mechanism. So put other types of seeds out there, let them compete for nutrients, and they'll outcompete Medusahead. And sometimes that works. Actually, I can't remember if I told you guys this or not, but there's a rancher that has some rangeland over in Colusa County around the Williams area in the foothills. And he's also a rice farmer. So they were flying on a nitrogen or something like that. And he had a bunch left over. So he had the pilot actually go and fly on the extra nitrogen onto his rangeland. And rangelands typically are pretty low in nitrogen, and the plants need it to survive. So they could grow at a higher rate of speed if there were additional nitrogen. And by him actually applying additional nitrogen there and it raining, okay, so that's the important piece. You can apply nitrogen, but it's still got to rain to actually disperse it into the soil so the plants can uptake it. He was actually able to foster growth in more desirable cool season grasses, and they outcompeted Medusahead. So that is a different way to look at competition. The main way that has been researched heavily is seeding or strip seeding. And so I'm going to let you guys kind of run with that as well. And then grazing is absolutely a potential solution, but the timing of that becomes very important. And then mowing, there's also been quite a bit of research done with mowing as well, and a combination of these things. So keep in mind, we're dealing with a pretty prevalent evolutionary force, right? And so it's probably going to take a combination of things to actually get a handle on Medusahead. And so I just want you guys to kind of be aware of that. When you come up with these solutions, it doesn't just have to be burning. It can be a combination of burning and seeding or something like that. And so just keep that in mind at this point. All right, let me look at something. So I will post this PowerPoint in the grazing management plan part of Blackboard. So there's a whole bunch of slides left on it that just kind of summarizes some of the solutions. Okay, so you guys will have that as a reference. But what I want you guys to do now is I'm going to put you in groups. It'll take me a minute to get those breakout rooms put together. Is I want you guys to start a discussion about different solutions that might be of interest to you. So the idea here is to get 2 to 4 solutions is what I think I put in the assignment. Okay, and then research them very deeply. Okay, so one thing that you may want to start with is with peer-reviewed literature about what information has been researched for Medusahead management that has been published in peer-reviewed literature. And why would we want to start with peer-reviewed literature rather than starting with other information like a blog or a handbook or something like that? What is the benefit of peer-reviewed literature?
It's got like efficacy.
Okay, what do you mean by efficacy?
Like, I don't like it's. I don't know. Like, it's hard to say. It's to be true, but like it's. I don't know. I can't describe it. It just has like it's.
More accurate, maybe?
Yeah, like.
Okay. More accurate, we'll take that. Controlled, maybe.
It's also reviewed by people like that are in those fields and are knowledgeable in those certain areas. So it's not just like a random person who's doing it.
Right. It's not like Tom Diatley went out and threw some shit down and got Medusahead not to grow, right? It's controlled. So it's utilized in experimental design. Data was collected in a systematic way. And then there was a statistical test performed to see if there was a significant difference between treatments. Okay, and so if you guys are in 490 with me right now, we're talking about all of this type of stuff. Like statistical significant difference is very important and very different than numbers being different, right? So those are things that all peer-reviewed literature will include. And so I want you guys to start there with peer-reviewed literature. So for those of you guys that have done lit searching in the past, what is a really good tool to use to start that literature search process? So a really good tool for lit search. Okay, so Cheyenne's saying OneSearch. That absolutely works. That's what the library uses. Nicole's saying Google Scholar. Good, good, good. So do we use Google if we are lit searching? No, we do not. Thank you. Okay, so Google is not Google Scholar. Those are two very different websites that employ different algorithms. Okay, so Google is going to collect anything that has the words that you type into the search bar, right? You guys use Google all the time. You know how that works. It has its own verb. Google Scholar will actually target the 21,000 peer-reviewed journals that are published, as well as some extension publications in the patent office. So it narrows the search. So when you use Google Scholar, you're already starting it with a narrower search base. Okay, cool. So our goal for the next 30 minutes is to brainstorm some solutions, go find some research, and then come back. And then we'll come back together at the end of 30 minutes and just do a quick roundtable through the rooms of things that you thought were interesting. Okay, and so I just want you guys to start on this process, because by the end of today, you guys, and then we can return back to rooms at that point in time. I want you guys to start getting a list of the solutions that you're going to present in your grazing management plan together. Okay, so, and I'll pop into rooms as I can. And then we'll come back together at the end of this first breakout room session and see where we're at, and then make a decision on how to move forward. Okay, so if you need to take a quick break, let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna organize you guys into breakout rooms. And then when you come back, if you come back, you're gonna come back, but if you leave and then come back, should have an invitation to a breakout room at that point in time. So it's just gonna take me a couple minutes to get these organized. Okay, guys, you should be in breakout rooms. If I messed up, come back to the main room and I'll get you figured out. 30 minutes, guys. Okay, there we go. Now I think everybody is back. So I got to check in with everybody kind of there towards the end. So I just would really like to do a quick roundtable of what you guys worked on in the past 30 minutes. So we'll go ahead and start. We'll start at the end and work forward. So group number 4, do you want to give us kind of a summary of what you guys were working on? Some interesting stuff that you found?
Sure, I can go first. So we all kind of just looked for articles that would fit for our solutions. And one that I found that was interesting, well, I found 2, but one I accidentally exited out. So I have to look for it again. But another one that I found, it talked about the use of pesticides with fire management, I think.
Okay.
And
Pesticides or herbicides?
herbicides.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, I don't know. What is
No,
it?
I was gonna say if it was like a pesticide, then they must be targeting some sort of pest.
Oh
in
no,
Medusa.
my bad.
Yeah, and then I got excited because I was like, oh, maybe there's a biological control out there that I don't know about. So that'd be cool. But no, that's okay.
Okay, well, it talked about how the use of both of them was really effective, and that let me see if I can find it. It said in general, spring burning or fall burning prior to herbicide application were both successful treatments. So it allowed an opportunity for there to be 2 windows to prescribed burning prior to using the herbicides. So I thought that was kind of neat, because then rather than, I don't know, like once a year, you had the chance to do it twice in case you missed a certain time.
Yep.
Anyhow.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, group 3. Anybody from group 3?
Are we group 3? Group 3, Dr. Daly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we
Yes.
okay. I couldn't remember. That's why I was like, I'm not sure what group we are. We talked about, we weren't sure if you wanted us to pick like 3 separate strategies and like test them throughout different periods of the year, or if you wanted us to pick strategies that like you could use together, such as like fire and a herbicide, or grazing and fire, or something like that. So I guess that's why we didn't get much done, because we weren't really sure.
Okay, so both and. So if you want to use a combination of treatments, that is awesome. Or if you just think one treatment, one single type of treatment would work, that works too. So you guys have a lot of flexibility here. We basically keep in mind our short and our long-term goals, right? So our short-term goals are to reduce Medusahead so that we can increase favorable grasses. That's going to increase animal unit months.
Okay.
Okay, so however you can get there, the cheapest way possible is the solution.
Okay.
Awesome. So did
Sorry
you guys,
about that. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
We talked about like herbicides, grazing, and fire. Those were like the 3 main topics that we were
Okay.
tossing around.
Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, that's a good start. Group 2.
So for ours, we discussed, we came up with like 3 different solutions. And like with using, so 3 different solutions, and we use like, for like example, we're doing grazing and then it's followed with like a burning to, because we were kind of thinking of like the root, what is a good way to like kind of get it down and then get the full root gone. So we came up with like 3 different ones, and then we were looking for articles that support it. I found one for grazing that was like a short term. Yeah, it just says that grazing is good for short term, but that's about as far as we got.
Okay, great.
So we're looking currently.
Perfect. You guys are on the right track. All right, and then group number 1.
Luke, do you want to go first and just introduce it, and then I'll go to the details that I found?
Sure. So through research, we found that herbicides paired with seeding worked really well, because herbicides work really well on their own, but sometimes they affect the plants we want to keep on the rangeland.
Yep.
So when paired with seeding, it counteracts the bad parts of the herbicides and works better. If you want to take it from there, Tessa.
Yeah, so the paper that I was reading included a lot of information. It was basically like when you should seed. So they did a study on when the best time for, I'm sorry, not seeding, when you should apply herbicides was. So it was either during heading or the tiller stage, or there was one more stage that they used. The bootleg stage. So it's either heading, bootleg, or tiller stage. And they found that the tiller stage was most effective, and they didn't even have to use grazing, that it almost completely cleared out the whole crop. but they also said that it's really, really that harsh on your plants that you aren't trying to get. So they were kind of having trouble with whether or not that was a good source to use as far as the using herbicides with the tiller stage. But they found that when using it with the bootleg and the heading stage, it still worked, but you'd have to use grazing with it in order for it to work as properly as it did during the tiller stage. And that would help decrease the bad parts of herbicides on your wanted species. And then like Lou said, a good way to counteract using it during the tiller stage would be to seed. So if grazing wasn't a good form during that time, then you could seed. I had a question, if you know this, Dr. Diatley, about spraying herbicides. Are they safe for cattle to graze directly after, or do you have to wait a week or so? Or
I'm sure you have to wait, but I don't know how long.
Yeah.
So that's a good question.
Okay. That's something we can research.
Yeah. Let me know what you find. And then if you have trouble
Okay.
coming up with the answer to that, let me know and I can try to farm it out to some of my colleagues.
It might be species specific too, of how they eat differently based on like sheep and cows, but
Yep.
well,
Okay,
I'll
good.
look at that.
Yeah, you guys are finding some good stuff. So I kind of got the feeling as I was in breakout rooms that you just need time, right? Would you concur with that? You just need time to do some research and flesh out some solutions. So here's what we need to do. So by next Wednesday, I want to meet with, we're going to spend the first part of lab going through carrying capacity. I'm going to give you guys the data that we need to calculate carrying capacity. So that's kind of the first half of lab. The second half of lab, I would like to meet with each individual group and we're going to look at your Google Sheet. Okay, so your just the bones of your grazing management plan. And I would like you guys to have flushed out 2 to 4, however many solutions you're coming up with. 3 is a good target number. Really basic solutions that you want to present to Julie. So I'm not saying that those can't change later on, especially as you gather more information. The whole thing about this type of project is that the more you know, the less you actually know, right? So the more information that you gather, trying to form solutions, the more questions you're going to actually end up having. And so I can help with part of those. I probably can't help with some of those, but those are going to be some good questions to just keep in the management plan. Or to run down basically and get some expertise. So so next week I want to do a spot check with every single group towards the end of lab, just to make sure we're on the right track. And so I'm hoping you guys have some screenshots pulled together and kind of organized. You have some organization to your grazing management plan figured out. You've got some rough solutions for the Medusahead issue in there. And then I don't expect you to have the carrying capacity stuff in there yet, because that'll be, you guys are working through those foundational principles this week, and we'll get into it more next week. So that is where we're headed. And so I think at this point in time, you guys just need time to go out and research some stuff. And so that would be what I would like for you guys to focus on between now and next Wednesday. So Monday for a lecture, bring some questions, okay, about some of the stuff that you're finding out there in literature, and let's walk through those a little bit. So I'm gonna keep offering information about, I don't know if that will work, that might work, that type of thing, just because I want us to be able to make suggestions to Julie that are actually applicable. So for example, group 4, you guys just sparked my brain when you talked about like the being able to apply to or herbicide at 2 different times of the year. And I think you said one was spring and one was fall. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that would probably work really, really good down here in the Central Valley. But in the higher elevations, the cows are coming out of those pastures right now. And it's already cold, like we aren't seeing very much grass growth at all. And so probably fall applications of herbicide, fall burning, that type of stuff just unfortunately isn't going to work for this scenario, even though it is a possibility and it is functional. So this is the hard part about land management, right? Is like we have, we know what the science says, but then we have to overlay and filter that with what's actually doable on the land. And so just keep those type of things in mind. And as you have questions, feel free to shoot them to me in email or over Pronto or office hours, whatever. So keep in mind that this is absolutely a mentor project. So if you guys as a group need to like book an extra appointment with me or something like that, I am happy to do that. To kind of flush through and answer questions and those type of things. So, but I think right now, probably more than anything, you guys just need some time to go out and research stuff. Would you agree? Thumbs up. Okay. Cool. Okay, so here's my question for you. We've got another 45 minutes-ish in lab that is scheduled. You guys probably have enough direction that we can do one of 2 different things. I can kick you back to breakout rooms and you guys can work on stuff. Or we can be done for today and you guys can meet up afterwards. I'm kind of open at this point in time. So I want to do what's gonna behoove your groups the most. So what are your thoughts?
I would say for my group, probably go back to the breakout rooms because we didn't quite finish discussing. I know we're going to meet up again before our next class, but we just don't know when now.
Okay.
So I think that would be helpful for us.
Great. Thanks, Tommy. Appreciate your feedback. Other opinions?
For our group, I think that we're pretty able to find good resources as far as what would be good treatments, but whether or not those treatments are good for the particular situation, I kind of think is what we're having trouble for. Like
okay.
From like we can find really good treatments, but we don't know. We do know, but we'd have to work through it and kind of talk about it and see if that would be a good option to include in our plan based on the scenario. I think that's kind of what we're having the most trouble with.
Okay. So would you guys rather go back into breakout rooms?
That doesn't answer your, yeah. I think that, I don't think that we need to, no, for us, but just for our group.
Okay. So here's what I will do, I think, is I'm going to set breakout rooms for another 20 minutes. Okay. If you guys feel like you need to leave, you can leave. If you want to go back in the breakout rooms, you can absolutely do that. I'm going to stay here in the main room to answer questions for the next 20 minutes. And then we'll get a plan after that. So I think that's probably the best of both worlds at this point in time. So, all right, sound good? Okay, please don't forget, case studies are due Friday by end of day. And then next week, we're gonna do a spot check in lab, but we'll also have a lecture next Monday at 10, where we'll talk more about Medusahead stuff. I'll probably try to show you guys some pictures. So we're gathering cows out of these pastures that we're calculating carrying capacity for and has Medusahead issues today and tomorrow. And so I don't get to help today, but that I'll be out there tomorrow. So I'm gonna take some pictures, probably shoot some video, and I'll share that with you guys on Monday too, unless I share it over Pronto tomorrow. So, okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and open breakout rooms back up. Feel free to stay in the main room and ask questions if you need to. And if not, I will plan on seeing you guys Monday. All right, there you go.
Casey, I just wanted to let you know that
Yeah.
for the case study, since I've been working on it, one of your questions was not written correctly. So is the case 1C in Eastern Oregon? It says that there's a 75% allotment for one and then a 30%.
Oh crap, I forgot to change that. Do 75-25.
Okay. And then the other thing was that I had a question on was the total animal unit years and the fair market value of the ranch. I don't remember going over those.
So we didn't. So that is you guys trying to connect dots there.
Okay. Because I know we went over the months, so I was just.
Yeah. So years is just a different unit of time measurement.
Okay.
So start with how you would do that in months and then just adjust it to a year. So you can do that either month wise or day wise.
Okay. Okay. Because I remember in the notes when it said that like it was using animals, but then it didn't say any animals on the actual like graph or like how many.
Right. This is for the second case study, right?
The carrying capacity in the Texas Panhandle.
Yeah.
Case. Yeah.
Yep. That has like a table and you're actually putting numbers in a table.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me. Oh, I can't remember exactly what the numbers were. So let me pull it up.
Dr. Daly, I had a question for you real fast.
Yeah.
Go back to the group. Where is this boat launch at? Because I couldn't find it back in the video. Or is that even super important?
You can label it. So right, the road that, so you basically have a road that goes north from the fairgrounds and then it goes up a couple miles and then it turns back to the west and goes a couple more miles to the river, not to the lake, but to the river. At the end of that road on the northwest side of the property is a boat launch and a parking lot.
Do you know what pasture the road goes through by chance?
So it goes between the south pastures and the north pastures.
Is it along that canal?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So just down at the end of that.
Like where the canal.
Yep. Right next to the inlet.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a boat launch. And then there's another boat launch. It's not in any of the pastures that we're dealing with, but it's back by the rat farm. So there's a little bit of an inlet that comes in off the lake. And right there, there's a parking lot and a boat launch there too.
Not on the river though.
Not on the river, on the lake. So this is more on the northwest side. Nope, northeast side, sorry.
Oh, I see it up there. All right, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, Stephanie, I'm still working on your question. I'm gonna try to pull this sucker up.
I have mine pulled up if you want me to just screen share.
Sure, let's do that.
All right.
Let me. Okay, now you should be able to screen share.
Do you see it?
I do. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay.
Because in the in the slides it says like to calculate the number of AUs, you need the number of animals times the animal number equivalent to
Yep.
get like, yeah. And so then
So there's another way to get to that number. Instead of using the number of animals, you can
Okay.
use how much forage they're going to consume in a year.
got it. So would that be calculating the AUMs then instead of the,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yep. So AUMs are months, right? So they're like an animal is going to eat about like what 720, 740 pounds a month. And
Yeah.
then, but for a year, they're going to eat whatever a year is.
Okay. And then for the fair market value of the ranch, that was the other thing I had a question on. Obviously,
Okay.
would that be the,
So can we back up? So your average annual forage production is correct.
mhm,
So the total ranch forage production is where you take the 533.33 pounds per acre and
okay,
multiply times the number of acres.
got it. Okay,
And then you're only going to end up using 32% of that number, which will
And
give
then-
you the usable forage.
okay, got it.
Cool. And then you can just divide by the pounds that they're going to consume in a year, and that'll give you AUYs.
Okay. And then would the AUYs be like multiplied times or 75 to get the fair market value? Or would
Exactly.
it be?
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Stop share. Okay.
Hi, Professor Diatley. I had a question
Yeah, Aline, go for it.
regarding the invasive species section. I know we're going fully deep on Medusahead, but for the rest of the ones, what information would you like? How much information would you like?
So for the rest of what? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
The other invasive species listed?
Okay, so like in the introductory part of the grazing management plan,
Yeah.
so you can just list them, that these are the invasive species that are out there. But the one that is the most concerning is Medusahead. And so that's why it's going to have its own section.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah, so you can do that. You can be creative about how you do that. You can, put it in a table. You can list it out in paragraph form. You can do something else that I'm not thinking of too. So, but you don't need to do anything more than just list them.
Thank you.
You bet.
Hi, Dr. Diatley.
Hi, Luke.
I had a question from the case study with case 1A, the first one.
Yep.
When for step 2, it says adjust for accessibility, and we have to adjust for an extra 10%.
Yes.
Do we take that 10% from if he decides to use 40% of the total forage, so he only uses 30%
Correct.
the total forage? Okay. Because I was confused and I didn't know if it was he can only use 30% of the total forage or he can use 10% less, or he can only use 90% of the already usable 40%.
So you're going to come up with different numbers depending on how you do it, those two ways that you just talked about. So it really comes back to pre-usable forage percentages. So like the first number was 40%, is that right? And then, but the extra 10% is really 30.
Okay.
So and that's a recommendation that comes from literature. So in drought years on ecosystems that aren't annual grasslands, so like sagebrush steppe, the grasslands, the high desert, those type of things, we really recommend only taking 30% of the forage that's available.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I did it correctly because I didn't want to 10% of the usable forage.
Yeah, right.
The total forage.
Got it. Yeah. So what is your if you did the math already, what's your number? Because I've looked at these 1,000 times, so I can tell if you're in the ballpark or not.
I only did up to usable forage because I got confused.
Okay.
But my usable forage was 795,000.
Okay. You're on the right track.
Okay. And then I just, instead of doing 40%, just change it to 30%.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
It should drop it down to like 500,000 ish or something.
Yeah, because my total forage was 1,987,500.
Yep. You're on the right track.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
I didn't have any questions. I was just listening to everybody else's questions.
Okay, cool. Hey, while you're here, let me stop recording.